Welcome to We're Not Wizards. We are the best, but not wizards. Enjoy the show!
Welcome to another episode of We're Not Wizards. My name's Richard. I'll be your host for July. It's been a mixture of sun and rain. The weather doesn't know. My lawn is looking absolutely fantastic. It's just one of those things. It's full of splendor. Sometimes the rain makes me want to swear. It makes me want to use the F word, but I've decided if I'm going to use the F word, then I need an expert on the F word to come and help me use F words. You could say this person, he's a little bit of an odd bird. Potentially started off as an ugly duckling, but pretty quickly turned himself into a Swanson and left his mark on the board game industry. He's had his little fiefdoms in the past. Maybe he's had his even little bits of his feudums in the past. So here to talk to us about everything that could be fled to everything that could be fur, I've got Mark Swanson from Odd Bird Games. Hello there, sir.
Wow, that was really good, Richard. I don't think I can top that.
You don't have to worry about the intro. It's not like we take turns. It's not like, right, okay, now you go. It's like, whose line is it anyway, or something like that. It's like, well, I've done my intro. Here's your selection. Here's your selection of words. Do you know where? Right, because people listen to this all the time, and some people comment on the intros. Do you know we got this from, because I used to work in a kind of a call center sales office, and when you're doing call center sales office things and you're saying the same thing again and again and again, it kind of gets dull, especially if you're having a conversation with people who are kind of having a conversation with you because they have to have a conversation with you because you're their service provider. So in order to alleviate the boredom, we used to just take random words and try and fit them into the conversation. Like fiduciary. things like that.
I can totally relate.
Mesopotamia,
Yes, yes, that's actually how I met my first wife. I don't want to really go into that story though, but the key word was watermelon, and it was a non sequitur. But early in my career, I was. I was on the phone with little old ladies that used to call into a toaster factory. Toaster factory. I used to work for Toastmaster, not the public speaking organization, but the actual manufacturer of toasters. And they would call and they would say, I am not able to get my piece of bread into this toaster oven. There doesn't seem to be enough space. And we go through all kinds of rigmarole to learn that, the entire machine was upside down. So you're right, though. You end up entertaining yourself with your own witticisms because, people can kind of be monotonous sometimes on a call center.
Yeah, and you're saying the same thing, and you've got to kind of act surprised when they give you a specific bit of information. Oh, you're going to be using it for a car. Well, that sounds wonderful, kind of thing. And it's like you're the fifth person in the last hour that's told me you're going to be using this particular thing for a car. So, let's kind of move it on. So a call center boy then. I had a toaster. I mean, do you go through training for that? Did you have one? Because usually on these kind of things, you have like a 3-week kind of crash course, and then they put you on the phones to kind of answer the questions. I mean, I take it. Okay, so here's a question for you. I mean, I'm considering you are a little bit of an expert in toasterology. Okay, on a toaster, okay. the numbers that go around the toaster, and this is probably just a beginning kind of, this is probably kind of kindergarten type question, but the numbers on the toaster are usually about like 1 to 6 or 1 to 7. Are they a
Mhm.
measurement? Are they a measurement of toastiness? Are they a measurement of, because some people say it's time and other people say it's levels of toastiness? What's the definitive answer, Mr. Swanson?
Well, the way the toaster operates, I can't believe
Mm.
I'm answering this question.
Yeah.
But the way, if you put it on, say, 3,
Mhm.
it will toast for a little longer than if you put it on 2.
Right.
So from a functional standpoint, it just simply increases the time that the filaments are
All right.
burning. From a toastiness standpoint, it does toast
Yes.
your bread a little bit more. So I would say a 3.5 is probably ideal. Some people like 4. I wouldn't go past 5.
But is that like minutes? I mean, could you put it on 3 and then time it? And then what happens if you like put it on 3? And if it went 3 minutes, then you'd be like, you've answered your question. But what happens if you timed it and it was like 3 minutes, 17 seconds? I mean, have you then unlocked an entire new unit of time? I
You
mean,
know, um,
this is the kind of the danger.
yeah, no, I'd have to go talk to the engineering department to answer that.
That's a
Uh,
lovely
I,
question.
yeah,
Put a support ticket in for you. Um, are you from a large family, small family, medium sized family? Kind of
a
growing up.
medium-sized family. I have one sister who is still alive. My other sister
Mm-hmm.
passed on.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, and yeah, so I was the middle child,
Wow. Okay.
and yeah, from a young age, my dad used to play a lot of board games with us. And that's how when I first developed my love of board games. Notice how I'm trying to kind of steer it in the direction of board games.
Well, it's either that or we're going to spend the next kind of hour and a half talking about kind of crumpets, tea cakes, waffles. We're just going to get into
That's fine.
various kind. We could do, but eventually we do have to kind of talk about board games. Did you do what every other family seemed to do, which is to have the kind of the Monopoly kind of copy?
Yeah, I mean that's the quintessential American
Mm.
game, Monopoly. And as a young bloke, I thought that was the long and short of it, right?
Yeah.
Monopoly it was a lot more complicated than a lot of the other games that I played. So I learned to play it and play it well. I went to tournaments and all of that. But
Wow.
before
What?
Monopoly, my dad used to. We came from a poor family, and so
Yeah.
we didn't really buy games. My dad would actually just make games out of paper. It's kind of like the original print and play,
Really?
like Stratego, for instance. He
Yeah.
he had he had played that before, and he figured out how to make that game out of paper, and we would play that game out of paper. And eventually, we bought it one
Uh-huh.
Christmas, and I enjoyed it, and it was pretty strategic. But I soon learned that a lot of the American games, Risk or Stratego, Monopoly, Clue, were largely based on luck. In fact, statisticians reverse engineered Monopoly and found it to be about 50% luck.
Yeah.
So you could know all the price percentage payoffs of every color group and still lose to your 9-year-old daughter because she rolls better than you. And after 2 hours of intellectual investment, to lose because of luck, well,
Because you
that's why
keep
people
rolling the
tip the
threes.
board in Monopoly.
Yeah. I mean, I wonder how popular Monopoly would be if they released the suckered version. And what I mean by that is the thing it's got like suction cups on the base of the board. So no matter what happens, you can get as angry as you want and make the motion to flip the board. But you literally have to pick up the entire table to kind of make this thing kind of going
It's
over.
funny because that's actually a feature in Tabletop Simulator. At any time, you
Yeah.
can flip the board and the pieces go everywhere, and then they automatically reset themselves. So that's kind of fun
you, you
for
could
people
just do
that have
that.
anger management issues, I guess.
You could just do it again, like again and again. So, with having that kind of influence with your dad, obviously sounding like a wonderful creative guy, did that have any influence on kind of like you're just stepping out there into education, stepping out there into kind of like a career. I mean, did you have subjects that you kind of like to focus on in kind of school? Were you kind of like an English major, a maths guy? Did you like your art? What was your your go-to subject that you liked at school then?
Yeah, my dad was very verbal. There were lots of robust conversations around the dinner table, and so I gravitated towards words. Liked to read. I was grew up with fantasy adventure novels like
Wow.
Tolkien and David
Yeah.
Eddings and Piers Anthony, and I've always loved sci-fi and fantasy adventure and medieval worlds. Because anything could happen. And I remember I got into Dune a little bit, Frank Herbert's Dune. I bought that when the game Dune came out. I bought that, I think, when I was 11 years old or something like that. And the rule set for that for an 11-year-old was pretty complicated. And I found myself reading the rule book, over and over again, and even copying some of the rule book passages onto note cards so that I could remember certain rule sets. And I think I started really getting into mechanics at a young age. But I never really knew that there was an entire world out there of so-called Euro style board games. The moniker used to be German board games because a handful of German board game authors like Rainer Knizia and Klaus Teuber were the mathematicians over there that just invented a ton of games. But eventually it kind of broadened a little bit. But yeah, that I discovered Euros, I guess, in the 90s, and I immediately fell in love with titles like Puerto Rico, which was number one on Board Game Geek for like 5 years in a row, and there were tournaments you could go to, and Tigris and Euphrates and Power Grid. Let me think. El Grande. There's a game called Taj Mahal that I love.
Yeah.
Many games, and I got hooked. And so I started. When you play as many games as I started playing, eventually you start to think, well, man, if I created one, what would it be?
So did you continue into college and things like that then, or did you go straight into kind of employment?
Yeah, no, I went to college. I went to the University of Missouri, and I studied journalism. Within journalism, there's a field or a discipline called strategic communications, which is advertising, public relations, and I majored in that. And then I went into the advertising world. I worked for Foot Cone and Belding, and some other ad agencies in Chicago, and was a copywriter, a person that came up with words and jingles and ads for lots of different clients like Coca-Cola and Oscar Mayer and Kraft. And so I did that for many, many years. And eventually I went back to my alma mater, University of Missouri, and I taught for 11 years in the strategic communication department in the journalism school.
Wow. Is there, with the type of, because I'm guessing from the journalism point of view, the advertising point of view, in your experience, is there people that you met that you're just like, I could just throw things at you all day and you could just come up with me with imaginative ways to kind of express that? And then are there other people that it's like, they've got everything on paper, but they maybe lack that little kind of extra spark that just pushes them over the edge into, you'll be brilliant. You'll be able to write kind of football reports day in, day out, but I wouldn't be able to give you your own column because you would write 3 of them and then you would kind of dry out. Kind of, is there that kind of, did you see that?
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely a delineation between, say, a public relations practitioner or a news writer. They're very good at answering the who, what, when, where, and how, and writing the content of a news story. But when it comes to saying things in a creative way that gets people's attention and makes them think about a product in a way that they've never thought about it before. That's when the kind of the creativity takes over. And some of that can be taught or inspired, and some of it is just natural. There's some people that are comedically funny, for instance, and there are some people that are just simply creative. And I remember a lot of my friends were writers, but they were on the kind of more the left brain side of things, and they would come to me and they'd say, "Hey, I have this great news story, but I can't think of a good headline." And I would write their headline for them. But that's why I always gravitated towards advertising, because of the creativity involved. And of course that creativity kind of was applicable and instrumental in the creation of board games, because along with the mechanics of a board game, there's also the theme and the story behind it, which is really, if you can integrate it with the mechanic seamlessly, then it's so much better.
Is there anything that you look back on in your realm, in your time of like your advertising thing, that you still kind of gives you a chuckle, or you still kind of makes you feel like warm inside, going, "Yeah, I did that, and that was pretty cool"?
Yeah, let's see. I worked on a campaign at the time. There was Patrick Ewing of the New York Knicks was a big player, and we did a promotion for the company I was with, where one lucky kid from school could win a day with Patrick Ewing. He'd basically go to the kid's school and just sit right next to the kid during lunch or whatever, and then it was we also partnered with Warner Brothers and had these Animaniac lunch boxes.
Oh,
that
wow!
kids
Okay.
could win. So yeah, I mean, one neat thing about advertising is just all of the IPs that you can leverage, whether it's the NBA or Warner Brothers and certain cartoons, and that again shows you the power of stories and brands. People like to connect with stories that they can relate to.
So, what was the jumping off point then? I mean, a lot of I mean, you're well known for, the first F word, which is Feudum. But was there other games before that you were playing about? I mean, what was your creation? I guess your kind of creationary kind of journey. Was Feudum one of these things that just popped out and went, whoa? It was like, oh my goodness, there's a huge fully formed board game here. Yeah. Or was there certain iterations that you kind of ended up kind of going through before you kind of reached kind of like a final product?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think, I had played a lot of games, and I was always on a quest for the holy grail of games. I always wanted to have the ultimate gaming experience, but I never quite found one that encompassed everything that I wanted in a game, in terms of mechanics that I love. I love action programming and area control and just generally resource management. And I wanted the ability to have all of those things rolled into a game, and I couldn't find it. So I invented it. And at the beginning, the theme and the mechanics were kind of broadly integrated in my mind. I knew I wanted, something that was open world or sandbox style, where there was kind of minimal character limitations that were placed on a player. And let's see, I also played a lot of video games. I was inspired by video games like Grand Theft Auto.
Wow.
Or Shadows of the Colossus. I don't know if you've ever played that game, but it's just...
Yes. Yeah.
And so I wanted to create a game that held together, and there was definitely a linear path forward, but was also gave truly multiple paths to victory and an open world experience. And so I started to invent Feudum.
So did you was it becoming kind of like little bits coming together? Was it at some point that Feudum was actually a much smaller game? Because you can understand, I've interviewed quite a few kind of people who have brought games, and designed games, developed games, and brought them into the kind of the crowdfunding. This is during, back in the day when Kickstarter was still seen as the be all and end all of kind of crowdfunding. And a lot of people seem to kind of start small. And then, then they grow. They go, okay, so this is my entry level game just to see if my games are, my game ideas are going to work. And then I'm going to drop, the bigger ones kind of down the line. And then you kind of get people like, say, yourself and say like Frank West, Mark Nardlinger from who did Vindication. Frank did City of Kings, and then you get like yourself. And I remember you guys were all not too far apart in terms of time scale. I remember Feudum, and I remember looking at the artwork at Feudum and just like kind of instantly kind of going, wow, this looks kind of amazing. But what made you decide to go with that as opposed to kind of, I guess, dipping your toes in the water kind of first of all?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think that I always set out to invent the game that I wanted. I didn't, my goal was not to start small or to gain, an initial following and then branch out from there. I just simply kind of blindly said, no, I want to make the game that I've always wanted to play. If other people want to play, great. If not, that's fine too. So, I wasn't trying to market myself or appease anyone. Or impress anyone. I just simply kind of made the thing that I wanted to play. And there was this moment during playtesting when I realized, okay, the game is working. People have forgotten it's a prototype. They're trying to strategize and win it. And that's when the real kind of fun began, because the hard work is over. The fine tuning begins. I mean, for any game, you have to have kind of this core mechanic, this engine. And once the engine is functioning and working, then you can add little peripheral cogs to it that enhance the game. But the engine is what is the thing that is vital and powers every other tangential element. And so, once you have that engine, you can add other details like perfecting the rules or creating the backstories of the characters and creating, user-friendly iconography and all of that. Yeah. So it's kind of a layering process. I liken it to a sculpture. You have this big block of stone and you just start chipping away a little bit.
Yeah.
And you keep fiddling with it, messing with it until it's more and more polished, and then you play test the heck out of it.
I've got I've got a double screen. Your website is on to the right of me, so I keep side-eyeing because Feudum kind of keeps on kind of popping in, obviously alongside all the other kind of games. I'm interested to know at what point the artwork was kind of brought in, because I don't think I've seen another game with similar artwork to Feudum. I think I could probably take a couple of components and a couple of cards or a part of the board from Feudum, and I could show it to people and they would be able to say, oh yeah, that's from that game. I think it's a fairly kind of recognizable kind of game. But at what point in the kind of the overall design process did you bring in that kind of level of art?
Sure, yeah. Well, I'm a very visual person, so I knew just from being in advertising that oftentimes it's the book cover that gets someone interested in reading a book.
Yeah.
And the same is true of board games as well. So I knew it was important, and I'm very visual. So I started my search for an artist. And I remember being Columbia, Missouri, and walking into an ice cream shop called Sparky's Ice Cream. And on the wall, it sounds fantastical, but this is exactly how it happened.
Yeah.
On the wall was a poster for a band that was going to come to town to play. I think it was Wilco, the band. And it was poster art for the band, but it featured this kind of whimsical lumbering behemoth, kind of in a cartoon style. And I thought to myself immediately, wow, that's it. This is my guy.
Yeah.
And there was no signature, no artist attribution on the poster. So I went online and I went to the band's homepage and I saw the poster, and there was a small attribution on the website.
Yeah.
And the name was Justin Schultz. So I did more searching and I found him and I sent him an email blindly. And I said, you don't know me, but I have this vision to make this game. I love your artwork. You want to collaborate with me? And to my surprise, he said, hell yes. And that's how it began. And if you've looked at Justin's art, I mean, he has, this uncanny ability to lure you in with what I like to say are superficially charming, whimsical images.
Yeah.
That upon closer inspection reveal something a little bit more heartbreaking or daunting. And I love that juxtaposition between seemingly harmless things that turn out to be menacing or tragic.
Well, the front cover of the box is quite literally like, you don't look at it, you're caught by the monster kind of appearing round the crest of the hill. But it's pretty obvious he's kind of chasing the two people that are running away from him. And the guy in the front is not looking happy at all. He's looking...
No. I mean, he's going to scoop those people up and throw them into his mouth like popcorn. I mean, yeah, that's not a good fate.
In terms, so you took Feudum to Kickstarter at the time, and it went. I mean, it funded, and it funded relatively kind of well. What was was it kind of like a different time? Was it a case that you kind of just put the game out there and then people kind of just found it and then started coming and kind of backing it? Or was there quite a big kind of marketing effort? I mean, I'm guessing with you having a background in kind of, advertising, knowing about marketing, knowing about press releases and everything like that. Did you kind of go, oh, I can use my experience from my job on this kind of thing? Was there a lot of marketing build up kind of behind it at the time?
Yeah, that's a good question. About a year and a half to 2 years before I launched the Kickstarter campaign, I was at Gen Con and I passed by a fella who was hawking his game, so to speak. He was luring people in to try to play test his game. It was a game about winemaking, and the name of the game was Viticulture, and the name of the designer was Jamie Stagmeyer. And he's like, yeah, you want to play my game about winemaking? I'm like, okay, sure. And anyway, we struck up a little bit of a friendship. I got his email. I started emailing him a little bit. And at the time, he was writing a book called The Crowdfunder's Guide to Kickstarter.
Yeah.
And it turns out, over the years, he's turned into this great guru and treasure trove of information for all board game designer entrepreneurs like myself at the time.
Yeah.
And I just essentially read his blog and read his book and knew that I needed to create an audience on social media, on Instagram, on Facebook, do a pre-launch Kickstarter page. So I kind of became a Stagmeyer-ite, if you will, and kind of learned the ropes from a guy who had done it. And so, yeah, I did everything I could to establish a little bit of community before a few launched on Kickstarter, but I had no idea how well the game would do. I think I had a little bit of luck because Richard Ham of Rahdo runs through, saw my game on Board Game Geek and started talking a little bit about how excited he was. And of course, he had a huge following at the time. So that put Feudum on the map a little bit. But I was not prepared for how well that first Kickstarter would do. And I wasn't really prepared that overnight I would essentially have a business.
And I think that's always interesting about Kickstarter, and I think, or crowdfunding in general, and I especially think it's become more interesting where you see the difference between the people who have their crowdfunding as like a passion project, that they put an awful lot of passion into it, but then when the business side of things kind of comes round, they get flummoxed by it. And they get, and if you get outside influencing factors as well. I mean, the last couple of years we've seen like COVID, we've seen like the shipping prices, the crisis, we've seen the prices of kind of manufacturing kind of going through the roof. And it's interesting you saying kind of like I kind of I kind of ran something for 30 days and I ended up kind of having a business kind of out the back of it. Because I take it, did you go through like a crash then? And what I mean by that is you must have been kind of like going, well, hey, we did it. And then the window closes and the funding, window shuts down. 2 weeks later on, you kind of get the money. Was there a point there at all you were kind of going, oh, we've done this now, and I've got six figures kind of sitting in my bank account, and now I need to kind of make this happen, and I need to make this kind of work?
Yeah, it happened. That experience happened the very first day.
Right.
I mean, the very first day, it was at $70,000. After 30, it was at $263,000. And what a lot of people don't know is after the campaign closed on BackerKit, I did twice that amount afterwards. And so all throughout, there was really no time for celebration.
Yeah.
There was more of a, how am I going to deliver on all of this in a way that makes my customers happy? Because, you have a very keen sense of needing to fulfill your promise and not let anyone down. And so that was my focus. I knew, being in the marketing and advertising business, how vital customer service is, and how customers are everything. And I've always believed that, even to the point of, giving away the farm, if you will, just to make customers happy. And there are limits to that, of course, but I was determined to deliver the project and make sure everyone was happy. And then the money that was left over, I just put right into the business to continue the dream.
Yeah. Because after the first campaign, you then went on to create a couple of expansions for Feudum. You had the Queen's Army, and then you had kind of Rudders and Ramparts. Did that do two things? I take it at that point, you're like, well, I've got to continue kind of bringing kind of the money in, and people are asking for expansions. But did that give you the option to kind of also release kind of second chances and even third chances for people to kind of get hold of Feudum again?
I think my motive was, I was a fan of the world that Justin and I had created, and I wanted that world to just keep going. When you fall in love with an IP, you want to expand it. That's why books have sequels and movies have sequels, and I wanted to do that for Feudum. And at the time, I wasn't thinking, oh, I'm going to create a bunch of more games. I mean, at that point, I thought maybe Feudum is my only title and the title that I continue to run with.
Yeah.
you think of, say, Tolkien, when he created The Hobbit, then he created Lord of the Rings and a trilogy, and it was all about that IP, that single IP, because it had enamored so many fans. So why not go with it? And so that's the way I was with Feudum for a while. And then at some point I'm like, okay, I've had my fun with this. And I think now I'm ready to move on from that world. Now, a lot of fans from all of the world want me to continue that. But at some point, you start to develop interests in other IPs, and that's why I started thinking about other themes and other games and other mechanics, and why I have several other games in the works.
I mean, it's like going back to Jamie. I mean, Jamie did. I mean, he did Scythe to great success, and then since then he's got like Invaders from Afar. It's got the Rise of Fenris. These are all expansions, but they were all based around kind of introducing kind of, I guess, different mechanics into this kind of Scythe kind of main world. So it sounds to me like you're looking to say, right, okay, well, I'm kind of drawing a line under this. I'm now off to do my kind of my Red Rising, or I'm looking to see if there's a Wingspan for Oddbird, which I'm surprised. You should have signed Wingspan. I'm just saying, Mark. I mean, it would have been the first. It would have been a perfect fit. But as I say, I'm a bit of an art snob. So one of the things that struck me looking at the site was Fir, which kind of reminds me a little bit of these kind of it's like a 3D-ish kind of square blocky kind of character. It's a little like I don't know if that looks like an otter, or it's not a squirrel because it'd have a different tail. So Fir's one of the titles that you're working on at the moment. Do you want to tell us a little bit about that and how that came to fruition? And is it an offshoot of Feudum that you couldn't use, or is it something that you decided, you sat down with a blank piece of paper and said, let's do something different now?
Yeah, so I'm a big fan of worker placement games.
Mm-hmm.
I love a lot of Uwe Rosenberg's games, Agricola and Caverna, Le Havre. And I knew that I wanted to create a game with that mechanic. And I knew that I wanted to use the Justin Schultz, the same artist. So I've always been fascinated by the lumberjack industry, the timber industry. And so I kind of decided to shift from fantasy to real world. And so this game Fir takes place in the late 1800s in the Pacific Northwest of the United States. So it is a departure from fantasy, but it'll still feature, the same character whimsy.
Yeah.
And like Feudum, it's going to feature resource management and a working cyclical economy and variable player powers.
Yeah.
And so the similarity comes in that variable player powers, where every unique role that you take on comes with some special privilege. So if you become, say, a tree faller, that's what they called them, you're good at chopping trees. Whereas if you're a log driver, you have a knack for driving logs down the river and recruiting more workers. And so the fun part of the game is that since you're kind of running a whole camp of timbermen, you can try out different roles, whether it's a shopkeeper or a craftsman, a log driver, faller, whatever.
Yeah. And
as far as unique mechanics, Fir has this unique worker displacement mechanic. So in order to succeed, you kind of have to put your workers in harm's way. And when one of your workers gets injured or displaced, they enter a trade building where, they're on light duty essentially, and they become a foreman. And this allows that worker to recruit day laborers or flip flapjacks, or, even become an impresario. Impresario is a kind of the guy who wore the top hat and said, "Step right up."
Yeah.
And see this vaudeville act, which was very much a place for entertainment during that era.
So is it a step down in terms of I guess kind of involvement from Feudum, because Feudum took up a lot of space. So is this a much smaller kind of game overall in terms of time and mechanics and stuff like that?
Yeah, I would say it's not as heavy as Feudum for sure. I would say it's more of a medium weight game along the lines of Caverna.
Oh, right, okay. So how long? Where are you in the development for it? Are you close to kind of putting it out there? Is it kind of like play testing point just now? Where are you? Whereabouts are you?
Yeah. Oh, it's pretty polished in terms of play testing right now. It's just a matter of the art, and Justin Schultz is busily working on the art. We have meetings every few weeks to talk about progress, and so that is a continually evolving process. And the game, however, that is very, very close to being released on Kickstarter is an entirely different game altogether. What one's that one is Fled.
The other F word. It's a 4-letter F word as well. Are you just edging along very, very slowly, and your next one's just gonna be
it's funny because I was about to break that trend, and was just going to give that up, but things just kind of fell into place, and I'm just going to go with it now.
You're gonna just make a game as long as it begins with an F, because that's
if I run out of F words, I guess I'm done.
They just like, don't give an F anymore. So what's Fled all about? Let's break that down a little bit then.
Well, Fled is a tactical card and tile escape game.
Oh.
It's also based on history. It's based on a 19th century prison called Spike Island, which is kind of in your neck of the woods, actually, I think. And it was a historical British fort turned island prison off the south coast of Ireland.
Oh, right. Okay.
It's kind of like it's like Alcatraz in the United States in a way.
Yeah.
And the first prisoners were just these young lads, and many of them were detained for minor infractions like stealing a potato during the potato famine.
Oh yeah.
And things were so bad during that time that it drove these young lads, like when I say young lads, I mean like they're 15, 16, and it drove them to petty theft. But in the mid 19th century, the British government at the time, they didn't take too kindly to any kind of stealing, so you could get locked up for good. So in this game, you play the role of a prisoner, guilty of some minor infraction. It's, every character in the game is actually, there's a little place in the back of the rule book where you can learn about your prisoner. And so naturally you try to escape this injustice for being locked up for, stealing a pint of milk. Or one fella was put in prison for being married to 2 women. And you could go to jail for bigamy at that time. So it's all based on history. So it was kind of fun to research the game and the prisoners, and but it's still kind of whimsical. It's still whimsical.
Yeah. So how'd you play it? What kind of, you said it's a kind of like a card kind of tile based game. So
well, during the game you manage a hand of tiles. You have 5 tiles in your hand. They're kind of like cards, but also tiles. And you first add a tile to the prison, and then you discard a couple of tiles to move from room to room, and then you replenish your hand. So there are 3 parts to the turn. And along the way, you're going to be collecting contraband, like buttons and stamps, or plum cake in this game. that you're going to trade for the tools that you'll need to escape, like a key or a file.
Yeah.
And if you're not in the right rooms when the governor, that's what they call the warder,
Yeah.
the governor whistles you to roll call, then any nearby warder could put you in shackles or worse, send you to solitary confinement. And so you score victory points for collecting items and for escaping.
Oh, right. Okay. So the whole point of it is you are kind of moving around the prison, but at the same time, kind of collecting the resources that are going to go towards your kind of your victory point total at the end. But you've got to watch kind of what direction where you're going, because if roll call gets called, then if you're not in the right place at the right time, you're essentially getting kind of penalized.
Right. You get actually sent back to your bunk.
Right.
And you have to kind of start your bunk again and navigate your way through all of the prison towards the outer perimeter, which is the place where escape routes are possible.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So have you been able to get this kind of like play tested? Is there a bit if you, I mean, and what's your approach to kind of play testing? Are you doing it in physical format? Are you doing it on like kind of tabletop simulator as well? Or?
So I actually sent a prototype game to a couple of blokes that happened to also do a lot of playtesting for Uwe Rosenberg.
Oh, right. Okay.
And so I sent the game to those guys, and they gave me a lot of great feedback.
Mm-hmm.
And then I also used the talents of the very talented Seth Jaffe.
All right. Okay.
He's the fella behind Crusaders.
Yeah.
The Crusaders. And he's also a very good developer. So he's going to get an official developer credit for Fled for helping me play test and develop it. Mm-hmm. And so it is very, very tight right now, and it's in fact I have prototypes that I'm sending to reviewers right now. Actually, in my house, they're boxed, and I just am gathering together some reviewers that would like to try it out, and so that I can feature any favorable review on my Kickstarter page. So yeah, it's ready to go. My wife and I played it just probably about 5 times last weekend.
Yeah.
And I'm very, very pleased because it's pretty tight.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. What's been the approach like to marketing kind of this time compared to, as I say, like Feudum? Have you followed the kind of the same path, or have you noticed, because Feudum was, pre 2020, have you noticed a kind of a change in the kind of the landscape? Have you even looked at maybe moving away even from Kickstarter or trying somewhere else, or is it the familiarity that you have with kind of the Kickstarter platform?
Yeah. So that's a great question. In fact, I wrote an article about that recently, where there was a time when we were talking about Jamie earlier, where he actually came off that platform.
Yeah.
I think the difference between me and someone like Jamie is, he's developed a contact list of tens of thousands of followers. So he has a kind of a built-in audience base with his Stonemeyer blog or whatever. But I think that Kickstarter is still kind of this marketing hype machine with backers that are so, ready to back your game. They're called super backers, and it's hard to match that level of publicity, even if you have to give a little bit of the profit away. It's still worth that kind of exposure. So I'm definitely still a big fan of Kickstarter, or for that matter, GameFound, or some of the other, BackerKit's got a crowdfunding platform.
Yeah.
So I still think it's important, and it's the democratization of venture capital, right? It's instead of having to take out a mortgage on your house to pay your artist and manufacture something, you basically get early adopters to say, we trust you. We'll give you some money to pre-order your game, and you can use that to manufacture it. So I'm still a big fan of crowdfunding.
Yeah, I think as I alluded to earlier, I think there's been a couple of times of late that it's had a little bit of a wobble. Sometimes exterior factors, but also I think I've been quite publicly. I publicly slagged off Kickstarter for saying when they're saying yes, we're going down the blockchain route, and it's like,
Yeah,
okay,
the whole I remember that. I think they've kind of cleared that up a bit,
they've released a
but a
press
lot of
release to say how drunk they were when they released it, to say they were going to, sorry.
a lot of a new entrepreneurial designers, they were very unfortunate to experience the supply chain issues during COVID,
Yes.
and
Yeah.
they underestimated shipping costs and freight costs, which tripled or quadrupled, and it just basically took away their margins. And so that was very, very sad. But things have gotten a lot better now. So things are kind of clearing up, and the horror stories I hope are behind us. You asked what has changed. The influencer market has changed. It's grown. It's gotten very robust. There are, hundreds and hundreds of, tier 1 and tier 2 influencers out there with followings from everywhere from, 500 followers, subscribers to 75,000 subscribers on YouTube. And one of the biggest differences that being in the industry, I know a lot of these folks. I've been to trade shows. I've met them. I have a growing contact list of influencers and reviewers, and so I'm able to tap into that now, and that'll help me.
Is there a particular criteria that you look for in reviewers? I know that Jamie has. I don't know why I keep bringing him up. I don't know what it is. It's just one of these. It's just that he kind of says his review policy is quite simple. That I want you to have, if you're going to be reviewing my game or producing any content, I think he prefers it to be like on a permanent kind of fixture. And I've had discussions with other people that kind of review games and create media and things like that. And I've got my blog that I write, as well as I review games. I post some of the reviews on Board Game Geek. I do post on Instagram, but I post Instagram generally. I'll put some of the pictures of the game that I put together for the review, and I'll almost post an excerpt of part of the review and say, right, if you go to the review now, if you go to the blog now, you can kind of read the review. So it's almost like a gateway as opposed to kind of posting the actual thing. I don't touch TikTok now because there doesn't seem to be any kind of permanency. It seems to be something that's there for a bit and then you just disappear unless somebody finds you and decides to kind of go through your videos, kind of thing. But what I'm just interested in your kind of take. I mean, what kind of is it a case that I'm not going to try and put words in your mouth here, but does it matter if it is somebody that's got, say, 50,000 followers on Instagram and they cover Fled, even if it means that they get kind of eyes in it for a couple of weeks? Because who cares what happens 6 months down the line as long as it's kind of out there? Or, what's your kind of what would you say your kind of position is on this?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think that over the years I have added to my influencer list, and it's several hundred influencers long, and so I only have 10 prototypes because having Panda Manufacturing that's the one I use.
Yeah,
good folks there, Michael Lee. And David Littman is my project manager, but they're not cheap. Making prototypes it's kind of expensive, and so I can't send it to everybody, and so you have to kind of figure out, well, if only 20 to 30 reviewers are going to see this, then you want to maximize your exposure. So I am influenced by the number of followers, subscribers that they have, and so there's a couple of, there's the low hanging fruit, the dice tower, the Rahdo runs through, those kind of big ones.
Yeah.
And you also have to think internationally. Liege of Games, the Nyx out of France. But then there are kind of like mid-tier folks that you want to give a shot, and even some new folks that are just kind of starting out, but who have kind of a great personality, kind of almost like dating,
Yeah.
and you want to give those folks a shot too. And so if they reach out and they're polite, I'll definitely send them a game if they can pass it along to the next person. And I think a lot of the reviewers know that, hey, I'll keep this for a week and then pass it along. And as long as that happens, then sure, you can kind of give it to folks that are just kind of cutting their teeth in the industry. And then there are other folks that you become friends with. Lance over at Undead Viking, or Jimmy Hudson at Board Game Spotlight.
Yeah.
The folks at the Secret Cabal.
The name was yeah.
I mean, and I've listened to that, and I think those guys are absolutely fantastic. And so you want to send your game to influencers whose work you appreciate and whose work makes you laugh. Not to stroke your ego, but your manner in your show is quite entertaining. A lot of times you don't realize it. People have different emphases. Some folks just want to do podcasts. Some people just want to do reviews, and they don't do Kickstarter reviews. So, like, making sure that that's obvious to designers, I think, is important. Otherwise, you could miss out.
Yeah, I think there's also the other thing is, as well as taking it from like a creator point of view, is that at the beginning, it's very, very easy when one channel that you do kind of starts to kind of not do numbers, but you get regular, because do numbers sounds clinical and cold. It's like, I like the fact, like, if I get, like, say, in the first, when you release a podcast episode, there is nothing cooler than seeing the first couple of hours, the first couple of hundred people kind of, they're automatically kind of downloading it. But I like to think that over the next kind of couple of days, there are potentially going to be somebody that's making a choice to spend an hour with myself and whoever I'm guesting with. That they're going to have a laugh, or they're going to go, oh, that's interesting, or they're going to go, he's being absolutely ridiculous again. But I'm having some kind of slight impact in some way, kind of maybe making a really, really wonderful day that they're happening slightly kind of better. Or just if they're having a crappy day, kind of going, yeah, okay, well, that kind of thing. But then I think the trap is to say, like, okay, I'm doing my podcast, that's doing well. Let's see what video I can do. Let's do some writing. Let's do some photographs. And sometimes there is that pressure to kind of be everywhere to everybody all at once, kind of thing, if you know what I mean. And it's a difficult battle, because I've done YouTube videos, and I've had people say, I really like your videos, because I just like, because you still got the same kind of chatty kind of conversation when you do the reviews. But then it's kind of like, unless you're kind of getting, and it's strange, because unless you are kind of getting that kind of a decent viewing figure on videos, they're a hell of a lot of work to put together. So so it's kind of a strange place to be in. So I'm in my nice little rut. I'm quite happy and content. I do my podcast. I get to speak to wonderful people like yourself, and then I do the review stuff. But recently I've started writing for Tabletop Gaming Magazine, which is like UK's. It's a kind of a printed and pressed on trees kind of magazine, which I've started writing for as well, which is a whole nother strange thing. And I guess you probably had this when you got your first kind of manufactured copy of Feudum, to actually see, to open up the cardboard box and see your name printed on the front cover. So it's kind of like you're flicking through a magazine, and I've written a couple of articles and done a couple of reviews. But to see my name attached to a review that's out there and people can actually walk into their local newsagent and pick up and buy is kind of a bit, it's kind of strange. It's a different thing. But
Yeah, it makes sense because, as you're kind of finding your way and establishing yourself as an influencer, it's good to dabble because you
yeah,
don't know what's going to float your boat.
yeah,
And then as you go along, it might be that you decide to niche yourself. I mean, that's what happened with James Hudson of Druid City Games. I reached out to him, and he doesn't do reviews anymore,
no,
but he used to.
yeah,
And then other folks decide to niche, like Edward over at Heavy Cardboard. Well, he just does the heavy games.
yeah, yeah,
Or Rodney at Watch It Played. Well, everyone knows Rodney flips the box and tells you how to play a game. And I guess it just depends
yeah,
on the evolution of your show and where you're the most happy and where you gain the most following and what
yeah.
you're most appreciated for.
Yeah, I think what's interesting at the moment is the fact that we're starting to get, and I've talked about this in the past, but we're starting to kind of get groups and gangs. It's like the Jets and Sharks.
Yeah.
Because we're starting to kind of like get, like, Rodney's got a crew, like Rado's got a crew. You've still got the Dice Tower. It's like, and I made this joke before, but it's still funny. It's like that scene in Anchorman, Mark, where they all meet each other in the car park, the different kind of TV crews. They get like Canadian TV and the network and the sub network, and it's like, are they going to fight?
It makes sense though, because there's the industry is still pretty small,
Yeah.
right? And so it can't just infinitely get bigger and bigger. At some point there has to be some consolidation and people join forces.
Yeah.
Because it's hard to get out there in front and make a name for yourself because people have so many options.
Yeah. Yeah. And you can get people that just go from nowhere to kind of like a huge firework, and they brighten the sky for ages, and then they just disappear, and you never see, you never kind of see them again. It's like,
Right.
what? And then the worst thing about it is, and I noticed this myself when I took a break from podcasting for a while, is that there's so much choice out there in terms of kind of like media, in that if you do disappear for a while, then it's not, you don't get people kind of, you don't go, oh, there's the hounds are coming to track me down and trying to figure out where I went to. It's kind of like, he's just gone. It's like, it's like there's another five, there's like, oh no, I started listening to this other podcast, they've got wizards on their podcast, so I started listening to kind of that one, which is kind of always interesting. Getting back to Fled, because we're clawing this back like some kind of honey badger going through a termite's nest. Have you got kind of like a price on? Have you thought about kind of like final prices for pledge levels and things like that at all?
Yeah, it's probably in the $40 range.
Wow.
For a pledge. Yeah. Yeah.
That's that, and that just goes to show this the kind of where we are with board game prices. But to me, $40 is kind of like, I'm going, that's about 34 quid. That's actually pretty. That's a kind of a decent price. Are you looking at kind of like stretch goals and stuff like that with the kind of the current climate? Are you looking at just saying, right, well, this is the game, and if you pledge, you're getting the best version of the game? Or are you kind of working on because there seems to be this like drip feed marketing kind of thing going on with a lot of people. It's like kind of like basing it on, if we get 100 followers of the campaign, we'll unlock this. If we get kind of 100 comments on it, if you get 100 likes on this Instagram post, we'll kind of unlock these kind of things. Are you looking at that kind of strategy as well, or is it just, here's the game, if you back it, we just get lots and lots of games out there?
I've seen publishers do both. I think that backers are, they're fairly adaptable. They respect it if a publisher doesn't want to do stretch goals. And then, but I personally like stretch goals. I think it makes the campaign fun. It sort of is the original spirit of Kickstarter
Yeah.
to have stretch goals. And I do think it incentivizes people to tell others because they want the best version of the game, or they want the extra bits in the game. And so they tell other people so that they can themselves get something more. So yeah, there will be stretch goals for sure.
Cool.
And I think, one great thing about the game is that I reached out to Clemens Franz, who, as you know, is the artist to a lot of Uwe Rosenberg's games.
Yeah.
Agricola, Caverna, Boone Lake, he did recently. And it's been wonderful working with him. I just, on kind of a whim, I reached out. I said, "Hey, Clemens, you may not know me, but I'm the fella that designed Feudum, and I love your artwork. Would love to collaborate with you." To my surprise, he said, "Oh yeah, I know Feudum. Yeah, I'll work with you."
That's so weird, isn't it? It's so weird when somebody does that.
I'm more famous than I thought.
It's so weird, but that just, that occasionally does happen if I email somebody and they go, you might have heard me. Because I never kind of go in, because I've done that before. You go in, you go, well, I'm part of this big podcast. And they go, who? Never heard of you. But it's kind of weird when you kind of go, and it's always somebody that you kind of never expected to kind of like even know you. And it's called, yeah, I know who you are. And it's like, oh no. Is that knowing me in a good way? Is that knowing me in a bad way?
It's really bizarre to go to a trade show. There was, I'll never forget this. I was at the BGG Con down in the Dallas-Fort Worth area.
Yeah.
And I was walking in the hallway and someone recognized me. Like, it's one thing to know the name of the author of a game. It's another to know their face.
Imagine that was scary.
He recognized me and he said, yeah, you're the guy who created Feudum. I said, yeah. And he goes, on page 17 of the rule book, there's a rule, blah, 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 blah. And I just wanted to know what the answer was. And I told him the answer, and then he goes, thanks. And he walked away. And then
I want you to change this. Here's the Tipex to writing it out. I want you to write in what the proper rule should be. It's like, all right then.
I still, I don't think I'll ever get over people wanting me to sign the game. That's bizarre. I sign a fair amount of autographs at trade shows, and
that's cool.
So it's a niche world. I mean, I suppose when you're in your element, you are a somebody, and then when you go to the local schnooks, you're nobody again.
Well, you could. So. I mean, you can still head to Walmart and get your shopping without people kind of sidling up to you. Yeah. You're at the frozen fish section, and somebody coming up and going, "I recognize you."
It's funny because I was, kind of starstruck, I guess, with Clemens Franz, because hey, everybody knows his artwork, and but he's just, he puts his pants on one leg at a time,
exactly,
just like everyone else. And he's actually very, very responsive, very professional. He tried to understand my vision for the game, and then try stuff that I hadn't thought of. It's really brilliant to work with the guy, and it's been great.
Awesome. So, do you have a timescale for when you're going to be bringing Fled to kind of Kickstarter then?
Yeah, well, I'm at the reviewer stage of the prototype. So once I send these out over the next couple of months, I hope to generate some buzz.
Cool.
I'll include that buzz and those videos on my Kickstarter page, which is pretty much done. The pre-launch page is pretty much done. It's not public yet, but it's done. And so when I'm ready, I will announce the Kickstarter launch date and start to reach out to, my database of folks to get their followers interested. So I guess I haven't answered your question.
You had
Q4 of this year.
It's like dealing with a politician, Mark. Just try to answer a question. If people have listened along tonight and they want to keep an eye on your bad self, where do you exist on the internet webs? Where can we find you?
Oddbirdgames.com.
Where's that come from? I didn't ask. Where's it come from? Where's Oddbird?
When I was a kid, my dad, I was kind of an eccentric, imaginative kid, and my dad would say, "You are an odd bird,
Wow.
son."
That's
And it was a little bit pejorative, I suppose, but I wore it and assumed it. So yeah, and then I guess you can also find me on Facebook at Oddbird, Twitter at Oddbird Games. Yeah. Oddbird by itself, I believe, is wine or champagne from Europe. So, yeah, that's fun too.
So get both. Get yourself a bottle and get yourself a game, and then you'll have a good evening.
Exactly.
What we'll do is we'll put all those links in the show notes so that we have got notes to show if you're interested in keeping an eye on what we're up to. There's a couple of ways you could do it. I am going to brag and boast and say, look, if you're going to go and pick up if you pick up an issue of Tabletop Gaming Magazine, there is a chance you will see my words written and printed there. But we're all across the social medias. If you search for We're Not Wizards, you'll find me in all the different lovely, shiny, bright, and silver foiled covered places. And if you like what you've listened to tonight, then please consider going to your podcast catcher of choice and giving us a rating or a review. If you're going to, say, Apple Podcasts, then make sure if you're going to give us stars, you don't give us 10 stars because that makes me big-headed and just unbearable. But don't give me 1 star because it makes us cry. Give me 5. Because it's average and I'm just a little bit average. But the person who's not been average is the rather wonderful, rather fantastic Mark Swanson. Thank you very much for guesting, sir.
It has been my pleasure, Richard. Thank you.
There's only 2 more things to do. The first thing is to remember that we're many things, but we're not wizards. Are we wizards, Mark?
We are not
wizards. There you go. And the second thing is to say goodbye. So before he fled, I don't even write these down. They just come popping off the top of my head. So before he flees or before he fled, it's a goodbye from Mark. Say goodbye, Mark.
Goodbye.
And it's a goodbye. It's an ability to not be able to speak from me, but it's a goodbye. Remember, stay safe, roll 6s, make something awful. And if you're going to get yourself off that island, escape, flee, fled, whatever. But check it out when it comes to Kickstarter. And check out all of the Oddbird catalog. But until the next time, goodbye.
A wizard is never late. Nor is he early. He arrives precisely when he means to.